Good evening, everybody. My name is Andra from the Romanian diaspora, and I would like to welcome you to the third event in our series, financed through the Community Initiatives Fund by the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner. I am joined tonight by Alexandra, who you probably recognize from an earlier event, and Izzy, who's a new guest on our series of events. Just a quick reminder, these events, as I said, are sponsored with community funding, and the whole point is to give you information about living in the UK, useful channels and contacts to help you access support if you need it, or just access local information. They are mainly aimed at Romanians living in the UK, but obviously anyone who hasn't grown up here, I guess, could potentially find this useful. We've already had 2 events in the series. The first one was probably about a year ago, and we were very lucky to have a Romanian PCSO as the guest speaker. She lived in Romania, and then after she came to the UK, she managed to fulfill her dream of training and joining the police. So that was about neighbourhood policing, which is a very specific unit in the UK and not something that most people living in, who've lived in Romania before would have experienced. And we also had 2 guests who were involved with different refugee and community support initiatives. We had Tracy from Coventry Council and Rashta from the Unity Hub in Birmingham. During the second event last month, again, we had a very special guest. We were joined by the Romanian General Consul in Manchester. Alexandra joined us for the first time, together with Raluca, who is a researcher at the UCL. And we talked about life in the UK after Brexit, what changes it has brought, and again, what help is there available for people who need more information or more support adapting to life outside after Brexit. You'll probably notice my usual sidekick and colleague Sorina is missing tonight. She'll be joining us in a bit, and she'll be talking about her own experiences. So she'll be joining us as a guest speaker tonight. Tonight's session is going to be about taking part in the electoral process in the UK. So we'll be talking about the various types of elections there are, how you register to vote, how you vote, how you contact the different types of representatives, whether you voted for them or not, they still have an obligation to assist you. So how to contact your representatives if you need help, how to stand as a candidate, and this is where Alexandra will be speaking tonight as the recently elected and the first Romanian county councillor in the UK. Congratulations. And we'll be also talking about other ways to get involved with the electoral process, namely volunteering at a polling station or volunteering as an independent observer, if that's something you're interested in. We'll be also looking at any comments on the video or in the event. So please do send us your questions, anything you want answered, anything you want followed up. I'm going to stop now, and I'm going to ask Izzy first, since she's new to the series, to introduce herself, and then Alexandra.
Hello, everybody. My name's Izzy Knowles. I live in Moseley, which is a suburb of Birmingham. And my background is in the police. So I'm a UK citizen. And I joined West Midlands Police back in 1979. So I completed 30 years service in the police. And in that time, I did various different things involved in custody. As a custody sergeant, I was a sergeant when I left, custody sergeant and criminal justice departments, criminal investigation departments, main patrols and response, And my last 6 years were as a neighbourhood police sergeant, which were also my favourite time, because that's the time when I was able to get to know the community, get involved, find out, you know, who the main people are in the area, and actually make some changes. And a lot of that was done by working in partnership with local councillors, the local council officers, youth groups, and also, you know, individuals who were involved in the community. I retired in 2013, and then I went to work for a homeless charity called Cypher Fireside, also in Birmingham. So I was working with people, very vulnerable people who were rough sleeping or street drinking or begging in Birmingham, mainly in the area where I live, around Moseley, Kings Heath, if anybody knows the area. I did that for a couple of years, and then the funding for that ran out, but I stayed at Cypher Fireside and I was organising the volunteers who were there for another 3 years. And in that time we had in this country a referendum. Before that time I wasn't really all that involved in politics. I was obviously interested in it. I always voted. I always took an interest in what was going on, but I didn't get involved to the extent that I didn't really look into the ins and outs. So I was aware of things that would happen that maybe changed the way, I mean, especially in the police, you know, obviously things happen politically that changed the way the police worked, but I was never really that interested in how it all worked. We had this referendum. I was absolutely devastated. I've got 2 children. I had my son, they're both grown up now, but when my son was 12, he had spent 6 months in France doing an exchange, and we had French boy and French girl come and live with us 6 months each time to learn the language, and it was just such a wonderful thing. And and they were absolutely devastated that the UK could vote to go out of the EU, because they saw themselves as European. To them, it was like their identity was being stolen, being this vote to leave the EU. So I joined a group called EU in Brum, and we started to campaign. And one of the events that, again, as well made change my mind was, or that affected me, was not long after the referendum, when I went to a sort of gathering of people, and there was a young lady there who was Polish, and she actually worked for the police. I think it was the British Transport Police, and she had this all the way up to the referendum. Everybody, you know, she got on with her colleagues, everything was fine. And then on the day afterwards, people weren't really talking to her, and she left work, and then she found out that they'd all had a party to celebrate the UK having left the EU, and how awful she felt about that, because she felt as though she had been suddenly she wasn't wanted anymore. And it made me cry. It really did, listening to her. I thought it was absolutely terrible. So that's another reason why I decided that I needed to get more involved in politics. So as I was working for the homeless charity, and then I joined a political party, and I joined the Liberal Democrats, and I went to some of the marches, and we were involved in campaigning for a second referendum. I left my job finished at the charity in, I think it was 2019, and we had the European elections, of course, which I campaigned in, and we got some MEPs. So I then got a job with Phil Benyon, who became Liberal Democrat MEP for the West Midlands. And so I got to go to Brussels, and I got to find out a lot more about how his role was. And again, it was really, really interesting. It was absolutely fascinating. Of course, that ended in the December of 2020, when we officially left the EU. I stood as a council candidate in the 2018 local elections. Didn't get elected at that time, and I also stood as a parliamentary candidate in the 2019 general elections for Birmingham Hall Green. I didn't expect to get elected because it's a very safe Labour seat, but it was good fun. I enjoyed campaigning, and again, I've learned an awful lot since getting involved in politics. And I will stand again as a council candidate next year, because in Birmingham the council's elections is every 4 years. You'll find that different areas of the UK run things differently. So some areas they will have elections every year, and a third of the councillors stand down and they're re-elected, or new ones are elected. But in other areas they have what they call all-out elections, and in Birmingham that changed from every third election to an all-out elections in 2018. So in 2022 we will have every councillor will stand down, and we will have more elections to elect a whole new council. So I will stand again in May 2022, and maybe this time I'll be more successful. In the last couple of years, I've worked very hard in my community to get myself well known, and I love doing it. It's one of the things I like doing, because you're connecting with communities, you're getting things done, making things happen, listening to people, understanding how people feel. It's really, really, I get a lot out of it, and it's something I enjoy doing. I enjoy coming from a police background, I used to enjoy solving problems, and I can do that as a council candidate. I can help people solve problems, help people get things done in their areas. And I think it's really, really important that areas need to reflect the communities that are living in them. So I always encourage people now to take an interest in politics, to do what I didn't do, but to think about, to find out who their councillors are, what they can do. If they're complaining about something, well, what can you do to make a difference? Can you get involved in community groups going on? I run a litter picking. One of the things I've done for the last 4 years now, I run a litter picking group. We call ourselves Moseley Litter Busters, but since I set mine up, there are litter picking groups have sprung up all over Birmingham, and lots and lots of people get involved because they can go out, they can work with other people, they can make their area look nicer, and they feel as though, again, they are making a difference, and you're with like-minded people, and it's very supportive, and you're actually out in the open air, and it's so it's good health-wise as well, your mental health as well. And so, but there are community things going on all over the country that people can get involved in, that gets you to get to know other people in your area. And I think that's something that I would always encourage people to do, to find out the things that are happening and get involved and be aware of what's going on. So yeah, I think that's about it for me. I've probably gone on too much. I'll be very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Izzy. That was definitely a very interesting career path, and see how you've linked your different experiences and how they've led you to where you are today. Alexandra, if you could reintroduce yourself to everybody, please. Thank you.
Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much to the Romanian diaspora for inviting me again to this series. I think it's so important to have those conversations about local elections, about democratic civic participation, about our status in the UK, and the many other topics that I know the organization does touch on so many series. It was very interesting to listen to Izzy's journey as well to democratic participation and standing as a candidate, and I did relate with many of the points. So I'll just briefly introduce myself and my background before answering some questions in more detail. I arrived in the UK from Romania when I was 18 years old, so it was in 2012. And I was one of the people who was not interested, one of the many Romanians that are not very interested in politics, especially in UK politics. When I arrived, I didn't know that I could vote in local elections. I remember just finding out quite randomly at university. I was chatting to some other students, and some other student told me, like, did you know that you can actually vote in for the council elections here? I was in Brighton at that time. And I thought, like, no, I didn't actually know about this. I thought that if I'm a migrant in the UK, I can only vote in the country I'm a citizen of. That was my impression. And because I was not very interested in politics, I didn't really start Googling answers myself or like start asking the question. I kind of expected the information to be told to me, and I wasn't really proactive in finding information about my rights, which was not a good idea. So that's why it's good to have those sessions, and for those listening in this. And then after I found out, I was still not very interested in politics in general. Like my first experience of democratic participation in Romania was the 2012 Romanian presidential impeachment referendum, and I didn't have a very good democratic experience with that one. People have different views on that, but I thought was the point of like many elections and many things in politics, and I was very disillusioned with politics. A lot of young people are. Nothing will change. All politicians are the same. Even if we vote for something, we don't get any kind of visible change. I changed my views as well. This is how it relates to Izzy's story with Brexit, with the referendum, because the referendum was the moment when I actually realized that decisions taken in the UK without the voice of migrants or people like me do affect me directly, do affect my rights in terms of basic rights. So, for instance, as you all know, and you probably have done already, hopefully, Romanians in the UK and all EU citizens had to apply for pre-settled or settled status to continue living their lives in the UK. It was quite shocking for a lot of people, because for many people who've been here for sometimes decades, the thought that you had to apply to make an application to be able to stay in your home had an impact in terms of emotional impact, but also in terms of just logistical impact in terms of your rights. So that's how I realized, well, I need to do something about this. I need to be involved. I was studying for a master's degree at that time. My background is in sociology, kind of research. So I was researching migration as a phenomenon, but I thought I need to be involved in the cause as well. So I started volunteering for the 3 million, where I currently work. I co-manage the Young Europeans Network, which is the youth wing of the 3 million, an organization campaigning on EU citizens' rights. And back in 2017, the 3 million was a very small group, mainly made up of volunteers. It was very different from the more professionalized organization it is today. So I started volunteering with them, started going to information events, started doing what I could to inform fellow Romanians and EU citizens about their rights. But then I realized that for us to have, as migrants, as Europeans, to have rights in the UK, we also need to have the representation, and whether we speak about local representation or parliament representation, and I felt that was quite limited or lacking in many areas in the UK. So I just looked around. That was a few years ago, how many Romanian-born councillors are in the UK, and I think I found a couple. I found someone in a parish council, I found someone in a London borough, and in most areas of the UK didn't have any Romanians in politics or were working for the councils, even for council staff. So I thought there's very little representation, and that's how I got motivated to become more political and to campaign on this issue of representation. So whilst I was working for the 3 million, I was doing my PhD on immigration as well. Like, everything in my life is immigration. I joined the Labour Party in 2017, and I joined it because also I felt that the Labour Party needed some more discussion on immigration. I felt the topic was avoided in the party, and I felt that you needed some migrants in the room in the party who align with the values of the party, but to put their hand up and say, we need to discuss about this. This has been successful to a certain extent, locally more so than nationally, but we're making progress in terms of like bringing up this topic. So this kind of led me to 2021, which is May this year, when I stood for election. So since I joined in 2017, I was kind of involved in meetings, conferences, and so on, but I didn't plan, I didn't join with the aim to become a candidate or a politician. I joined with the plan to kind of, well, lobby on migrants' rights in general, from like within the party and outside the party, and to kind of bring this conversation about immigration and migrants' voices, and to also help out locally, because locally, like the people who are in my local area, who are Labour Party councillors, were really inspiring and inspired me to join as well. So the importance of role models as well is very important in politics. And then I ended up last year, when I'll speak in more detail maybe later when there's a question about candidates and so on. But I ended up standing for election in May 2021, and then I became, as you mentioned earlier, the first Romanian-born county councillor, to my knowledge, at least. So yeah, it's a very, very exciting time in politics as well. In Cambridgeshire County Council, we have what's called a rainbow coalition, a joint administration, Labour, Liberal Democrats, and Independents. So it's a very interesting model of politics as well, where we kind of work a bit more in collaboration, and we get to do a lot of different things and different good things together, hopefully including raising the profile of migration issues. So I'll leave it here, and then I'm sure there will be many questions in terms of the elections and practicalities and details.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. And yes, indeed, we will come back to the specifics about standing for office if that's something people want to do. Hello, Sorina, and welcome. I've already spoiled the surprise and mentioned that you will be joining us in a dual capacity tonight, and that you will also be a guest speaker on the very specific topic of, if you don't fancy standing for election, but if you like to support the electoral process in a different way, you could tell us a little bit about things like, for example, volunteering for a polling station, or being an independent observer, which is a very, very important job. And both of them, really, the elections couldn't take place without them.
That's correct. I'm happy to be here. Nice to see you guys.
Do you want to introduce yourself quickly, or do you want to just
very quickly? I'm Sorina, and I've supported the last 3 electoral processes. First one as a completely observer, more than for my own knowledge, and then that led me to understand a little bit more about how to apply to become an official independent observer, and why that was important, and what other roles were available within the electoral process. So, for example, becoming a member of the Electoral Commission, or indeed a voting station, or becoming a president or vice president for the said voting station, but also to understand how we can influence potentially any changes to the electoral policies afterwards. So all of these are things that we can explore if you want to, but they are in our grasp as citizens, as normal people. And we shouldn't be afraid of doing them if we want to.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
I'll start with a little bit of boring information that can hopefully help us guide the rest of the series. So there are largely 2, and please do jump in and correct me, but there are largely 2 types of elections. There are the local elections, and then there are the national elections. In the local elections, you're usually looking at councillors, whether they are city councillors, parish councillors, or county councillors, apologies. And then another role, actually, and it's quite fortuitous that this event is funded through that office. Certain jurisdictions have a police and crime commissioner. This is somebody from outside the police service, who has oversight of certain decisions and who works really closely with the head of the local police force. And this is one of the local elections people can vote in. The one in Birmingham took place earlier this year, for example. And it's a really interesting role. It's relatively new, and it runs on a slightly different electoral cycle from local elections. So you don't have a crime commissioner and a local council. Usually you don't have them in the same year. Everybody who is a legal resident in the UK can vote in the local elections, provided they have registered themselves on the electoral roll. The national elections in England specifically, they are the 4 MPs who sit in Parliament in Westminster, and only British citizens are permitted to vote in those elections in England. Sorry, Izzy, did you want to?
Commonwealth citizens can vote.
Okay, thank you very
Irish,
much.
yeah, it's another very wrong omission that EU citizens with settled status are still not going to be able to vote in the national elections, and yet somebody who's from Australia or a Commonwealth country is allowed to vote.
Thank you. Thank you for that specification. So yes, if you have a dual citizenship, which is either British or Commonwealth, then you can vote in the for your local MP in England. And also you are eligible to vote in referendums, which is something that we touched upon earlier. The Brexit one is probably the most recent one, but there have been others throughout the years. The rules are slightly different in Scotland and Wales. I think we're just gonna leave it at that because we don't want it to get too complicated. But just to make you aware that they are slightly different. So if you're not sure, please check with your local electoral officer. Each council has an electoral officer. They should be your first point of contact if you want to be added to the electoral roll. This is not something automatic. You have to do it yourself. You have to request it, or you can do it by completing the form that the local councils send out. I'd like to say every couple of years, every 2 or 3 years, I think they get issued in the post. Izzy's going to correct me.
Sorry, it will depend on your electoral area.
Okay.
Because they're all different, really. But
Yeah.
sometimes some councillors will write to, well, no, because they would need to know. They wouldn't know until you're on the electoral roll to be able to write to you.
Yeah.
So it's always best when anybody comes up to 16 or 17 to get their names onto the electoral roll, even though they can't vote until they're 18.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really important if you want to vote to get yourself added to the electoral roll, either through the form that you'll get from your local authority or by contacting your electoral officer and making sure you get added. That is how I joined the electoral roll for the first time. And it's a fairly quick and swift process. You don't have to send ID in the post or anything like that. So don't worry about being left without your documents or anything like that. It is a very easy process and it is definitely worth it. Once you are on the electoral roll and an election comes around, you have 2 options. You can vote at a polling station in person, and anybody who's grown up in Romania is probably familiar to some extent with that process, where you just show up with a piece of ID. You can also vote by post, and you have to specify. You can change your mind anytime you'd like, so you can swap between in-person and post and again. Some people prefer postal voting. They find it more convenient. Other people love the experience of going to the polling station and actually putting their ballot paper box. And a lot of polling stations, they prefer you, and they are easily accessible so that as many as people as possible can vote. I've mentioned earlier that you have different types of elections. Obviously, that means you have you end up with different types of representatives. So you might be represented at a local level by a councillor or a number of councillors, depending on the size of your constituency. Or at national level, you are represented by an MP, a member of parliament. Now, there are two things to note here. First of all, you don't have to have voted to be able to access their services. So even if you couldn't vote or chose not to vote for a specific person, if you approach them with a problem, they are obliged to help you. Obviously, because of the institutions they are part of, the issues they can deal with and the ways they can help you are different. But if you want to raise something, always go to your local representative. The information, again, is available publicly on the website, so you can find them very easily. You can find their contact details. And I think I'm going to stop there and ask Izzy, Alexandra, and Sorina if they want to add anything else.
I can add a bit about what's happening in Parliament now, because as it was said, certain people have the voting rights now. So like currently, just to kind of summarize for everyone, in local elections in England and Northern Ireland, so if you live in England or Northern Ireland and you're Romanian or for another EU country, you can vote currently. And also you can obviously vote if you're from the Commonwealth, or you're an Irish citizen or indeed a British citizen, and those three categories can vote in all elections. Now, if you're someone who lives in Scotland, or Wales, they have different rules there because they have devolved powers over elections. So this basically means they can implement different rules to England. So in Scotland and Wales last year, their governments introduced residency-based voting rights. So what does it mean in practice is that anyone, regardless of your citizenship, regardless of your passport, anyone who has legal status can vote in their elections. And this includes their local elections, but it also includes voting for the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly, for instance. So elections are considered national at the level of Scotland and Wales, and they have kind of Westminster UK Parliament election that encompasses the whole country. Yeah, I just wanted to know just very, very practical points, because EU citizens and Romanians ask me now, what is happening with Brexit? Will we still have the right to vote now that Brexit is done and dusted? Well, in inverted commas, do we still have the right to vote if we come now as EU citizens? If I come now from Romania for the first time in the UK, do I still have the right to vote? Well, everything's being debated actually as we speak. Probably they're still in Parliament, I don't know, but everything's being debated by members of Parliament now in what's called this elections bill. So in very simple terms, because it's a very complicated piece of legislation, what the government is proposing is that only EU citizens who arrived in the UK before 1st of January 2021 and have pre-settled or settled status will still retain, so will still be able to vote in the local elections in England and Northern Ireland. So this basically means that a Romanian who came last year, has pre-settled status, can still vote as they could before, but a Romanian who comes now in October 2021 and moves here on a visa, they can't vote in any elections. Similar to how how non-EU citizens have rights. So it's only this category of EU citizens who arrived before 1st of January will still have the right to vote. Now the legislation is still debated, but there's a very high likelihood that the legislation will pass because without any amendments, because of the majority that the Conservative Party has in Parliament. Also, the legislation now proposes the use of photo voter ID. So, compared to Romania, where you need an ID to vote, in the UK, you didn't need a photo voter ID. And again, now in Parliament, there are debates as we speak about the introduction of photo voter ID. So basically, there can be some changes in terms of who can vote and how we can vote in the UK. But until all this kind of gets debated and gets in law, I would still say register to vote. If you have the right to vote, register to vote, get your name there. Two very practical points. If you change your address, lots of people who are from the migrant community, especially around my area, move a lot of addresses. I moved about 10 times, living in Cambridge. So every time you move address, you need to update those details, you need to register to vote. There's an online form as well. It's on the gov.uk website /register to vote. You update your address and you make sure you still get your polling card and are able to vote. And then also, if you change citizenship, so if, for example, like me, I'm Romanian and I got British citizenship last year, again, you need to complete the form again to let them know you're now British. So therefore, you can vote in all elections, because if you don't let them know, you won't get any polling card for the general elections whenever they will be in 2024. So those are kind of just very two pragmatic pieces of information. And the final thing I would say, there's a misassumption. I speak to a lot of Romanians locally, and there's a misassumption that you need to be in work or have a national insurance number to register to vote. You don't. You'll be asked for a national insurance number on the form, but you can tick the box, I don't have one, and you can explain a line, I don't have one because I'm not in work, and therefore I don't need one. Or you can say anything there, but you don't need a national insurance number to be legally allowed to vote. And it's sometimes a misassumption. So I will hand over to Izzy now.
I think Alexandra's covered most of it. I'd say, yeah, absolutely. Please do register to vote if you're not, and if you're not sure about anything, contact your local councillors or campaigners in your area, political campaigners or councillors, because they will be able to help you go through the process if you're not sure. And if you the moving address, yes, again, because you moved address, you will still be on the electoral roll, possibly at your previous address, so you'll still be able to vote, but you would have to vote in that area. So it's important to get that moved across so that you're actually voting for the representatives who are going to represent you in the area that you live in. The one election that wasn't mentioned was the mayorals. So we have the local elections, the national elections for your MPs, the police and crime commissioner, and the devolved mayors. So some areas like the West Midlands has a mayor who sort of oversees. He has different criteria of responsibilities than the council, but he works a lot with the local council in order to things like transport, especially. It is one of his remits. So again, I think that is an election. The mayoral and the PCC elections are ones that you can vote in locally. As a settled or pre-settled status, you can vote in those elections, and they're really important.
One thing that maybe is worth mentioning, just because it may actually convince people and see additional benefits, is essentially the link between the electoral roll and a credit score report. So maybe you want to expand on that. It will just bring it home. If you're not registered to vote, is that going to impact your credit score in any way, shape, or form? Or is it going to be appearing on your credit score that you're not registered to vote? Or is there a penalty or a fee if you're not registering to vote or you're not filling your electoral vote?
I don't think it does impact negatively. I think it does help a little bit because, like, the more you are on the system, whether it's you pay direct debits or you're registered somewhere or you have like some sort of like footprint of yourself and your address, I think it does help your credit score in general, but so do other things like having direct debits or like having other kind of things. But it does help to have like it's an additional record of you and your presence in the country. And actually I found out when advising people about applications for settled status and pre-settled status, sometimes people struggle to prove that they were in the UK because maybe they weren't in work or in study, maybe their bills or council tax bill was on the name of the landlord or was in the name of their partner. So actually having something like even like a voter registration and the letter from the council did help to prove that they were in the UK and they voted. So it can help from a pragmatic point of view in terms of like having an extra thing for the credit score checks and like an extra thing for your residency. I'm not sure about the negative repercussions. I'm not sure about that, Izzy.
It shouldn't have any negative repercussions at all if you're not registered to vote. But I agree with Alexandra. It does help to give you that footprint, and also for people to, I mean, for instance, because I volunteered with Settled in the last year, and I was helping people to apply for settled status. And one of the things I did, because I'm campaigning politically, I had access to the electoral roll, so I actually wrote individually to every EU citizen who was on the electoral roll. I was able to find them because they're the only ones who are only registered to vote locally. So I wrote to them all saying, you know, have you applied for settled status? Do you need to apply? Do you need any help? And as a result of that, I helped several people who, mainly elderly, who weren't online, who had no idea of how to do it, or even that they needed to, because they've been in this country for so long that they really didn't think this applied to them. So again, if you want to connect with your local representatives, it helps to be registered to vote.
Thank you, Izzy. And that's actually probably an important piece of information that came through in that intervention, that the electoral roll is public information. So your name and address are public information unless you choose to withhold it. And again, when you register to vote, you can ask to be removed from the public electoral roll. Nothing else is public information. So no one will know if you voted, how you voted, how you engaged with the process at all. So please don't be put off or worried about the fact that you are on the electoral roll. You can't get into trouble for it, basically, and there are no really negative consequences. But as I said, if you can choose to go on the electoral roll and be left out of the public information. So if you are concerned, do that, and that will still enable you to vote in the elections. So now that we are registered to vote and our information is up to date, next steps are the election itself. You know, I'd like to talk a little bit about what actually happens when you go to vote. Who are you gonna meet, and what roles those people play, and if you want to get involved in that capacity, how you can go about it.
So it's slightly different from what we experience in Romania. When you go to vote in the UK, and what I found is that most people actually choose to vote by post, simply because it's much more convenient and you don't have to worry about the weather. So you can be at work and your vote has already been submitted. You don't have to make specific arrangements to go to a polling station, and you're likely to receive your polling card a month before the election, and then you have to submit it before, I think it's up to 2 weeks before the elections or something along those lines. It will all be written on the actual polling card that you receive. The second thing that differs tremendously is the fact that you do not need an ID to go to the polling stations with, whereas in the Romanian elections you do. But you do need to have the polling card with you when you attend, and that polling card is not necessarily mandatory, but it will help in some examples, simply because sometimes the register is not necessarily updated. But if you forgot it, it's very unlikely that they're actually going to ask for it. They're just simply going to ask for your name. They're going to look you up on the list. They're going to essentially strike your name as if they're here, and they're going to vote. You're going to be given the cards. You're going to go into the booth with the cards. And again, a huge difference. There will be no stamp. You'll be given usually a pencil, and you're going to pick your option, and that's it. Whereas in the Romanian election, you have to choose a stamp, and there's usually a lot more mess with things. So in terms of functions, I think most polling stations in the UK that I've seen, certainly in small in cities like Birmingham and Coventry, they're small voting sections, and I don't think I've seen any of them that have more than 2 or 3 people actually manning the voting station. Unlike, again, the Romanian elections where you have up to 9 people, some are even bigger. So, and there is another notable difference in the fact that you don't actually have independent observers, or I haven't seen independent observers in the British elections. Maybe that's something that you guys can tell us more about, because it's something that always surprised me, that nobody's observing these elections. Maybe it's the level of trust is different. But yeah, that's how I would compare the 2 experiences.
Super, thank you very much. And yeah, the again, the postal vote, which is for everyone in the UK, if you want it, it's important and it's very convenient. In Romania, elections usually take place at the weekend, so that you don't have to take time off or make special arrangements to make it to the polling station. In the UK, elections usually take place during the working week, on a working day. So the kids are very happy because their school is closed. The parents are probably less happy for the same reason. Yeah, if you think postal voting is for you, please request it. I choose to vote by post. I do like, as Sorina said, the fact that you get the information long ahead, so you have plenty of time to research your candidates, and you have plenty of time to make up your mind. And I've never had any issues using postal voting in the UK. You know, never had any issues around my vote not arriving in time or not being counted or anything like that. Izzy, you've unmuted yourself. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Wanted to know whether you wanted me to mention proxy voting. Were you going to talk about proxy voting?
Please go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, so that's another way of voting. If you're not able to do a postal vote or an in-person vote, you can nominate somebody to vote for you. And sometimes this can work if, for instance, your postal vote goes missing, or you've got problems, or you know you're going to be out of the country, so you're not even going to be able to vote, to send your postal vote in. But it's exactly the same way. You can apply online. You apply for your proxy vote and you nominate who's going to vote for you, and then when they go to the polling station, they take the ID and they're allowed to vote for you. And obviously, hopefully they will vote in the way that you told them to. So just another way to ensure that you're able to do your vote.
Thank you very much. And I know it's probably been a lot of information in the past 40 minutes or so, and it might be overwhelming. Sorina has been very, very busy posting all of the links and all of the official information in the comments to our videos. So if you've missed anything, or if you're not sure exactly how to find the information, the links are all there for you. Do we have any questions at this stage, Sorina, from our viewers? We can't hear you.
I think I ticked that box tonight.
There's one, there's always one.
Yeah, sorry. So I was just saying, it is to be expected not to see that many questions because there's quite a lot of information. But as far as I'm concerned, I've seen that there's a lot of people who are reading at the moment. So there might be some later.
Thank you. We'll come back to that in a minute then. Izzy and Alexandra, you've both mentioned in your respective introductions that you have chosen to stand for elections. Do you want to speak a little bit, please, about the practicalities? I assume your lives have changed quite a bit during that period of time, especially during the canvassing. So if you could tell us a little bit about if you decide to stand for election, well, what will that mean in practical terms? And Alexandra, you've been serving for a few months now. What will your life look like after you have hopefully been successful and elected?
Should I just, I mean, the practicalities again, I don't want to risk giving too much information. So just to say that all the information about standing as candidates is on the Electoral Commission website. There's quite comprehensive guides there. But I think in general terms, like the thing that if you're thinking about being involved politically, the key question that people are asking me is, should I stand for a party or as an independent? And there are different processes for that. Because if you stand for a party, whether you stand for like the Liberal Democrats, Conservative, Labour, Green Party, any of the registered political parties, you'll have quite a different process because a lot of parties have an electoral agent. They will support you through the paperwork. They will organize like some things for you, like campaign literature. Whereas as an independent, although there are many successful independent candidates as well, you'll have to do the process by yourself in terms of you have to complete and submit some nomination papers. You have to be nominated by a certain area. You have to submit your paperwork. You have to usually fundraise in other ways for your literature, for your leaflets. And if we think about council elections, like in my area in Abbey in Cambridge, you're about 8,000 or so like households. So there's a lot of ground to cover in terms of the literature and campaigning and so on. So those are just the practicalities. If you're standing for a party, and I'm sure Izzy can speak more to her experience here as well. I think it depends very much on the region and how active the party is in that area. Like in an area that's, let's say, a Labour controlled area, the local party would usually be quite strong, have a lot of canvassing, a lot of literature going on, whereas in let's say like a conservative run area where like the Labour vote is like 5%, there would be a local party, but it would be much more difficult to campaign and have the resources needed to do the campaign. So I'm not sure, Izzy, do you want to comment on the kind of political party candidate here before I speak about council?
No, I think you've covered it really. Exactly, it's much more difficult in a way as an independent, but that shouldn't put people off if there's something they really want to do. A lot of independents campaign on specific issues quite often, so and can be very successful. But yeah, I'd say if you're really interested, you probably best bet is to join whichever political party you feel most at home with, really, and sort of find out what support they can give you.
Yeah, there are usually internal processes as well. So let's say when you join a political party, there are some requirements. Usually it depends on the party, I think, but you have to be a member for a certain number of months before you stand for election. I mean, usually it's quite important to be, active in the local party as well, because although in some areas in the UK there are candidates who stand in the areas where there's need for candidates, I think, in most of the cases it's people who are active, involved in the party, involved in the local communities who get selected as candidates for those areas. So it's important to be active, if you join a party, to be active, to show up to the meetings, to campaign even on a single issue. Like I was a single issue campaigner for a long time. I was campaigning on migration issues. Now I campaign on various other issues like early years education and other issues. But I started with a single issue, and I think that's something sometimes quite helpful because it focuses your mind until you learn about the political structures. It's very helpful to focus on one issue, whether that's housing or the environment now concerning many people, like focusing on a single issue and then kind of growing like you're campaigning politically onto different issues later on as you learn the structures of politics locally.
Oh, and another thing is, and in fact I think a lot of British people don't understand this either, is a thing called paper candidates. Yeah, so especially if you live in an area, because of our political system, we call them safe seats. So you live in an area where the the political party is perhaps not going to get very many votes, but there's still a candidate. It may be some, and that you feel as though, well, that person haven't seen any literature from them, I haven't heard from them, don't really know what they're about. It may well be that they're a paper candidate, So somebody who's agreed to have their name on the ballot paper, but they're not actually doing any campaigning. But it enables that people who agree with the policies of that particular party to vote for somebody that they want to, rather than have to choose a party that they didn't particularly agree with.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in terms of campaigning because after I got elected in May, I had some interviews with the Romanian media, and one of the questions was about how campaigning is done in the UK. And I mentioned about door knocking. So I mentioned that I knocked hundreds of doors in the campaign, and I went and said, what do you mean? Because that's very rare, apart from like maybe very, very specific individual politicians. It's extremely rare to see this happening in Romania. I mean, like definitely myself growing up, I haven't ever seen a politician knock at my door or even be present in the area near where I lived. So it depends on each, obviously, different cities in Romania and so on. But I didn't have that experience of seeing a politician or actually speaking to a politician before I moved to the UK. And so it really surprised me when I moved to the UK. And a few years in, I contacted my MP. Actually, once I moved to Cambridge, like very soon in like 2015, about a certain immigration issue. And my MP in Cambridge responded in a couple of days. I got the email back from his office, and I was so shocked. I was like, a politician replying to me directly. So like I really kind of enjoyed the more personalized feel of politics. But it's a lot of hard work, because especially if you're not in a seat, like Izzy said, that's safe, that like you're sure that the party will win. Of course, there's a lot of hard work involved. So, for example, I campaigned in an area in Cambridge where it's what is called a split ward. So it's like two political parties. So we have like Green and Labour. You can have Lib Dem and Labour and so on. And political parties always compete against each other. So the more competing and campaigning you have, of course, the more everyone needs to do to kind of win the votes. So yes, I mean 6 weeks before the campaign, especially in the intense campaign period, I was out, pretty much every day doing different things, whether it was events, whether it was like after work in the evening, even knocking like on 20 doors like each evening, but kind of adds up. And it's really interesting how it works, because you kind of knock on doors, you ask about local issues, people speak about local issues. Sometimes you'll have a 2-minute conversation, sometimes you'll be in front of that door for like an hour either agreeing about something and having a nice conversation, or arguing about something. It's quite like a different experience that I had, coming from Romania and seeing that kind of politicians actually speaking to you one-to-one and actually having that contact. I'm not sure how your experience was, Izzy.
It's the same, and I think the other thing as well, when you become politics, is you're suddenly expected to know everything about everything. Yeah, so you can be talking about transport one minute and drugs the next minute, and another thing the next, schools the next minute, and you're expected to know everything that's going on. Obviously, you can't do that, so, all the time, but you can be open, so you can always find out and go back to people, and they appreciate that. I think that personal touch is what's so really good about politics here.
Thank you very much. Sorry,
Yeah,
sorry, no,
I'd definitely echo that, because it's something that we have not come across, and not just in Romania, but also in other European countries. So having lived in France for quite a long time, there isn't that kind of encounter directly with the local candidates and the politicians. It might be a Latin failure, I don't know, but definitely in the UK you've got it spot on.
Thank you. And that sort of takes us back really nicely to the point that we mentioned earlier, and I really wanted to reinforce, especially because we're coming towards the end of our session. Please do get in touch with the local representatives. So if you live in England, you will always have one MP who sits in Parliament, and you will have at least one councillor. Some areas have more. They can help you with different things. Again, you can find their details online. You can contact them by email, by telephone. You can contact them in person. And as Izzy mentioned, not everybody knows everything about everything. So please be confident about bringing any issues to their attention, because it might simply be something that they weren't aware of, or something that they didn't realize had a particular implication. So please speak to your local representative, and don't be afraid to contact them, regardless of whether you voted for them or not, regardless of whether you are entitled to vote or not. We've been on for almost an hour. actually. I've just realized. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. So much to the best. We still don't have any questions.
Well, it's a lot of information and we can speak for hours about it. If I can just plug one, one website it's called rights2them.com. It's actually like really, really useful. It's rights2them.com and you can put in your postcode and find who's the MP, who is the councillor, and actually a lot of the councillors have email online and also phone number as you said. So yeah, it's really, really helpful website.
Yes.
Guess what I just posted.
Oh, okay, great. Yes,
She's
that's my
fast.
favorite.
She's
It's
fast.
my favorite one. And on the campaign as well, because I mean my other hat apart from local councillor is the 3 million. So the 3 million we're running a campaign on voting rights that politicians across party support as well. So it's about not actually extending voting rights. So what we're saying is that everyone who is resident in the UK should have the right to vote in local elections, and it's called Our Home, Our Vote campaign. You can find it as well online. So if you're interested to kind of get involved in that, we're campaigning very hard on those issues. Yeah, thank you.
Can I say as well that please tell all your British friends about the 3 million, because an awful lot of us, I know about the 3 million because I've been supporting for the last 2 years, but an awful lot of my friends aren't aware. They aren't aware of issues around EU citizens' rights, and they will support you. So tell them about it, and especially and an awful lot of elected representatives here are not aware. They're not aware of all the issues around settled status and the problems that some people have had in getting settled status, and all the problems that they're now going to have getting changing from pre-settled status to full settled status. So please tell them, and I think you'll find that a lot of people are, will be sympathetic, will be empathetic, and will want to help. So, but they don't expect everybody to know because they don't.
Thank you very much. In that case, I think I am going to wrap up. It's been a pleasure speaking to everybody again. A really, really rich session that I hope people are going to come back to over and over. So just to recap really quickly the information that we went through, please make sure you are registered to vote. If you're not sure, check or just register. Once you've done that, please keep your details up to date, especially if you move house. Please vote when there is an election that you are eligible to vote in. Please contact your local representatives. There is a wealth of help and support available, and please don't be worried about reaching out. If you feel like doing something more, you have a number of options. One of them is actually help out at a polling station. And there are a number of roles in which you can do that, and it's usually quite welcome help. Or if you're feeling really, really brave, please stand as a candidate, whether you do it from a political party or as an independent. You can be an independent candidate and you can be successful. It's a lot of hard work. Again, all of the links are in the comments. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a lovely evening. And if there's anything that you're interested in that we haven't covered, please continue to add to the comments and we will come back to you with the answers. Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Thank you.